The next generation of Web3 platforms is already here today. Do you still remember EOS, NEM or NEO? Well, they actually never really delivered on their promises from the last cycle, but there's new kids on the block, and these kids are called Avalanche, Polkadot and Cosmos. I'm obviously heavily invested in the Cosmos ecosystem. I'm the co-founder of Cosmoverse, which is the annual conference in Cosmos. We, by the way, just announced that we're coming to Istanbul this year. I'm also running a validator called Cryptocito, which you can delegate your Cosmos coins to. And obviously, this YouTube channel is primarily focused on Cosmos. That said, I'm slightly exposed to Polkadot. I have very small DOT holdings and one or two parachain investments that I did here and there. When it comes to Avalanche, I'm actually not invested at all. Just for you to set the field, however, this video today is not supposed to be a Cosmos shill show. In fact, I try to be as neutral as possible and just bring you facts around their architecture, shared security models, their vision, and their ecosystem. Also, at the end of the video, I'm going to give you a conclusion and my predictions where I see this ecosystem going long term. Now, first point that we compare is the origin story and the history of the project. Starting with Polkadot. Polkadot is the brainchild of Dr. Gavin Wood. And Dr. Gavin Wood is no other than the co-founder of Ethereum, the inventor of Solidity, which is a smart contract language that is used in the EVM, the smart contract platform on Ethereum, and also the author of the Ethereum Yellow Paper, which is the technical paper of Ethereum. So this guy is an absolute all-star, and he is also an absolute OG when it comes to crypto. The two other founders of Polkadot are Robert Habermeyer and Peter Saban. The original idea for Polkadot actually came around mid-2016. That was the time where Dr. Gavin Wood explained in a blog post to the Ethereum community that he would leave in order to start a new venture. The first draft of the Polkadot white paper was then released just a few months later in October of 2016. The core entities behind Polkadot are Parity Technologies, of which Gavin Wood is a founder of, and the Web3 Foundation. Polkadot conducted a token sale in October of 2017 and raised $145 million. However, there was a large incident that almost broke the neck of Polkadot. That incident is referred to as the Parity hack. In fact, it was two hacks over a few months that were targeting the Parity multisig. And that multisig held obviously all the funds and also all the funds from the fundraiser. The first attack drained around $35 million and the second one froze $120 million, which is a combined loss of 650,000 Ethereum. That's massive. And that was 2/3 of the proceeds from the ICO. However, they shortly after declared that they will be working on trying to recover those funds and they will still have enough funds to ship Polkadot. Well, and that actually happened in May of 2020. The mainnet for the Polkadot relay chain launched on May 27th, 2020, and the first parachains went live on December of 18th, 2020. If we look at the history of Avalanche, Avalanche is the brainchild of Emin Gün Sirer, who is a Turkish-American computer scientist and software developer, as well as an ex-professor at Cornell University. Keep that university in mind. I also made an interview with Emin around a year ago, which you can watch right here after watching this video. The two other founders of Avalanche are doctoral students Maofan Ted Yin and Kevin Segnichi. The original idea for Avalanche came around May 2018. Also, there's a paper released with Team Rocket, which is a pseudonymous group that first shared information around the project. Emin actually has a very strong background in virtual currencies and P2P networks. In fact, he released a cryptocurrency, a virtual currency that is running on proof of work in 2003. That's 5 years before the Bitcoin white paper was released. That's obviously massive. The core entities behind Avalanche is Avalanche, which was founded in 2019 by Emin. Avalanche also conducted a token sale over multiple phases actually. that raised them over 250 million US dollars. The mainnet of Avalanche launched in September of 2020, and it launched with full EVM compatibility, so developers could directly build applications. Now, if we look at the history and background of Cosmos, Cosmos is kind of the brainchild of Jae Kwon. And Jae Kwon is a blockchain software architect and graduate from Cornell University. In fact, in my interview with Emin actually told me that he knew Jae from back in the days, and he told him about some ideas that would eventually lead to Cosmos, but I'll leave you guys with that information. I don't have proof to verify that actually was the case. Other co-founder is Ethan Buckman, who is an internet biophysicist and a core contributor and core brain behind also delivering the vision of the Internet of Blockchains, right? So Ethan and Jae are the two founders of Cosmos. Zaki Manian is also heavily involved in the development of Cosmos since the very early days. But the original idea of Cosmos actually dates back all the way to 2014. And Jae Kwon actually back in these days wanted to build an application on Bitcoin. However, it was just not scalable. It wasn't fast. It wasn't efficient. So he developed what would later become the most widely adopted proof-of-stake consensus algorithm called Tendermint. And Tendermint was actually a pioneer in proof-of-stake. Big projects such as BNB or Polygon are actually built on their forked own versions of Tendermint. The core entities behind Cosmos are the Interchain Foundation as well as Tendermint. There was also a fundraiser in April of 2017 that only raised them 17 million US dollars. However, through very smart treasury management, they could turn these $17 million into well over $100 million in that year. The mainnet of the Cosmos Hub launched in March of 2019, and IBC, which is the interoperability standard in Cosmos, launched in February of 2021. And 2020 was kind of a rough year in Cosmos. There were a lot of internal discrepancies, and a lot of developers have resigned from the core entity Tendermint, which is called AIB actually, all in bits, and formed independent development teams, right? Next up, we look into the network architecture, which is category number 2. Starting with Polkadot. Polkadot actually has a very interesting concept, which is called the relay chain parachain architecture. And if you talk about Polkadot, you're actually talking about the relay chain on which DOT resides. And that relay chain is very minimalistic, and its primary use case is there to provide securities for parachains. What's very interesting about their architectural design is that the Polkadot consensus algorithm is very innovative. In fact, what they did is they separated the production of new blocks from the finality of old blocks. Right? So it's a dual consensus model, which I have not seen in crypto elsewhere. As I mentioned, the smart contract layer on Polkadot is basically outsourced to parachains. So the relay chain does not have any smart contract functionality. The SDK on Polkadot is called Substrate, and well over 150 projects are built using Substrate. When we talk about interoperability, Polkadot aims to ship XCM, which is basically the IBC equivalent on how parachains will communicate to each other. Now, how does their shared security model works in a nutshell? In fact, there are what's called parachain slots that are granted for a duration of 2 years, and any DOT or KSM holder can bond minimum 5 DOT or 0.1 KSM to a project that wants to take part in that auction and win a slot. And if that slot is being won by the project, your coins will be bonded and locked for the duration of this slot. What's very special about Polkadot design architecture is that they also implement what's called a canary network. And that canary network is called Kusama. Kusama is kind of like a mainnet that's actually a testnet, because applications that want to launch on Polkadot are actually supposed to first launch on Kusama, test out the application there before they go on Polkadot. Talking about Avalanche, Avalanche has a primary network and subnet design architecture. What does that mean? That means that on top you have the primary network in Avalanche, which consists of 3 core chains. the X chain, the C chain, and the P chain. If you talk about the consensus, Avalanche pioneered or invented what's called SNOW, which is a BFT proof-of-stake consensus algorithm that actually works very similar to a DAG, which stands for Directed Acyclic Graph. And if you watched my previous videos about Hedera, you know that that's also a very interesting idea on how to scale. So this consensus algorithm is optimized for throughput and is perfectly suited for smart contracts. Talking of smart contracts, there's actually two ways how you can deploy smart contracts on Avalanche. Number one is you just natively launch on the C chain, because the C chain, which is one of the 3 core chains in Avalanche, stands for contract chain. And that contract chain is EVM enabled. So you can just directly launch your smart contract on the C chain, which directly accrues value also to the AVAX coin. The second way to go ahead with that is that you launch your own subnet. And you can launch that subnet via the Avalanche CLI. When we talk about interoperability, Avalanche also just released what's called the AWM, Avalanche Warp Messaging. That's basically their IBC equivalent that is tailored for Avalanche subnets. Now, I just mentioned that there are 3 chains. I already explained to you what the contract chain is all about, but what about the 2 others? Well, the X chain stands for the exchange chain, and that chain is where the AVAX token resides on, and that is the chain where fees and assets are created and settled. The P chain stands for platform, and that is where subnets are actually being created and maintained, and validators and all the staking stuff is being coordinated on the P chain. If we talk about shared security, they have a very interesting concept, which is kind of like more similar towards what Polkadot is doing, because validators on subnets in Avalanche actually also have to validate the Avalanche primary network. The entry barrier to launch your subnet, you must run a validator on the Avalanche primary network, which requires you to stake at least 2,000 AVAX, which at the current price of $20 per AVAX means $40,000 US. Now, Cosmos actually pioneered the app chain thesis, and Cosmos is designed in a hub and zones architecture, right? In fact, Cosmos is a network of sovereign layer 1s. There is no primary network, there's no relay chain. That is basically the base layer of security for all other chains. And on the base layer of every Cosmos chain, we have Tendermint, which is the most widely adopted BFT proof-of-stake consensus algorithm. On top of that, we do have CosmWasm, which is the native smart contract environment on Cosmos that is Rust-based and already implemented in over 30 chains. You can launch your app chain via the Cosmos SDK, which is basically the equivalent to Substrate on Polkadot. The interoperability is achieved through IBC, which stands for Inter-Blockchain Communication, and IBC is already implemented in 54 layer 1s that are in production via 390 active IBC channels and transfers billions of dollars in value every single month. Shared security in Cosmos, however, is coming very, very soon. In fact, the rollout of interchain security on the Cosmos Hub will already bring 4 projects with the launch that are going to be quite massive for the Cosmos Hub and also change the game for Atom's value accrual. Also, mesh security is in the works, which is a concept of shared security where provider chains of security can also be consumers at the same time. And probably the end game here for shared security is that eventually all these layer 1s and all these other chains outside of their native environment will secure each other. So think about if DOT would secure Avalanche and vice versa, and Atom would secure DOT and Avalanche and vice versa, right? They all secure each other. We have an ultra secure Web3 environment, and the end user doesn't even need to know all that, right? It just works silently in the background. Now, category number 3, let's talk about the most important thing, right? The native coin of all these platforms. Starting with DOT. Polkadot's native coin is inflationary, has no hard cap, and had a 10 million Genesis supply. As I mentioned earlier, there was a token split where the community basically decided to redenominate by a factor of 100. So that means the actual genesis was 1 billion coins, and there's currently 1.19 billion DOT coins in circulation, which puts it at a valuation of $8 billion US. If you want to stake your DOT, be aware that there's a 7% inflation. The current staking rewards are 14.5%. The adjusted return is 6.97%, and the average fee that you pay for validators is roughly 6.3%. The minimum requirement for staking is 80 DOT, and there is a 28-day lockup. Stakers and delegators are actually called nominators, and there's 47,000 nominators in Polkadot. The staking ratio is 46.6%, which is basically the ratio of how many DOT are actually staked and bonded to secure the network, which means that the current security in Polkadot equals $3.6 billion US. The use cases for DOT are network security, aka staking, governance, native gas token, and also the killer application for DOT, parachain onboarding through bonding your DOT, or KSM in Kusama's case. Which means that a success of parachains would also increase the value for DOT. Also, Polkadot currently has 297 network validators, which is really, really cool. If we look into AVAX, AVAX has very different tokenomics, right? In fact, AVAX is deflationary and has a max supply of 720 million coins. So there will not be more than 720 million AVAX coins. When they launched the AVAX coin, 50% of the Genesis supply was reserved as a security budget to incentivize validators and stakers. Current inflation of AVAX is 5.6%. Rewards for staking are 8.1%, which leaves you at an adjusted return of 2.6%, and an average fee for staking is roughly 6%. The minimum requirement to stake your AVAX is 25 coins, and there is a 14-day lockup according to stakingrewards.com. Currently, AVAX has 54,000 stakers, and the staking ratio is 62.5%, which means AVAX actually has a security of $5.2 billion US, which is higher than Polkadot security, right? However, there are only 340 billion AVAX in circulation. The use cases of AVAX are network security, same as Polkadot, native gas fees, same as Polkadot, subnet onboarding, similar to how DOT is also tied to the success of parachains. Currently, the network has 1,222 validators. If we look at Cosmos, Atom, similar to DOT, does not have a hard cap. It has a dynamic inflation rate, similar to DOT as well. And the current inflation for Atom is actually 14.75%. The staking rewards are 22.1%, and the adjusted return is 7.7% at an average fee of validators of 7.1%. There is no minimum required for staking. However, there's a 21-day lockup, and currently, according to stakingrewards.com, there are 744,000 individual wallets that are staking Atom. The staking ratio is 62.54%, which means that the network security equals $2.7 billion US. The use cases for Atom are network security, native gas, governance, and very soon consumer chain onboarding, right? Which would basically put Atom in the same category as DOT. That would mean, and it's not live yet, but it will come in the next couple of months, that a success of consumer zones in Cosmos would also increase the value for Atom. There are currently 293 million Atom in circulation, which puts it at a $4 billion fully diluted valuation, and 175 mainnet network validators. Now, the last point to compare is the ecosystem. And Polkadot has roughly 300 substrate built dApps, 36 active parachains, and 4,500 daily active users at a daily trading volume of around $50 million US, and the TVL is $920 million US. The top applications of Polkadot are Moonbeam, Ocean, Astar, Centrifuge, and Akala. and there are roughly 1,400 active developers in Polkadot. Obviously, for that number, there's so many different sources, but that's the number that we found, and 1,400 is quite impressive. Avalanche has 445 dApps in their ecosystems, 44 subnets that are in production. There is no limit of subnets that can ever exist. And subnets just need to make sure that they run a validator on the Avalanche primary network. There are 40,000 daily active users, so almost 10x the users of Polkadot. And the trading volume per day is around $635 million at a TVL of $900 million. The top applications on Avalanche that are native to Avalanche are Trader Joe, Banky, and GMX. And there's roughly 300 active developers. In Cosmos, we do have 54 IBC-enabled layer 1s that are in production and hundreds of dApps on smart contract chains. The biggest chains in Cosmos are actually OKX chain, for example, 71,000 daily active users, Osmosis, which is the premier DEX in Cosmos, 33,000 daily active users, and the Cosmos Hub, which is preparing for interchain security, has 70.6 thousand daily active users. IBC currently has 10,000 daily active users, and overall across all chains in Cosmos, there are roughly 120,000 daily active users according to mapofzones.com, and in the entire ecosystem, there are around 1,000 active developers. Now, that all was a lot of input. Let me draw some conclusions here, right? I think conclusion number one is all three ecosystems are very innovative and have already substantial traction. That said, I think the approach and how they started to execute on their big vision, which in the end of the day is quite similar, is completely on different ends of the spectrum, right? Polkadot focused immediately on the shared security aspect and also to bring parachains on board that would rent security from the relay chain. Cosmos, on the other hand, entirely focused on interoperability, shipping IBC, and launching layer 1s with their own validator set. Avalanche, to me, seems to be a great compromise of all of these things, right? They just launched AWM, they have subnets, they have native smart contracts on the Avalanche primary network, so they are very well positioned in all of these aspects. Now, here's my prediction for all of these three coins. I believe that Atom, AVAX, and DOT will all enter the top 10 by the end of this year. That said, this would mean that Atom has the highest upside, which also makes sense because their killer application isn't live yet. And AVAX and DOT already have very strong positioning and have strong value accrual for their native coins. Personally, I'm very excited and hope that there will be more synergies between those projects. In fact, there's already a subnet on Avalanche that implements IBC. There's also a parachain on Polkadot that's implementing IBC called Picasso, and the project on Avalanche is called Landslide Network if you want to do your research on that. That said, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope you learned something. Follow me on Twitter @Cryptocito, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay safe and be good.